Okay. Hello, hello. Can you guys see me? Not yet. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get the Facebook one set up. I feel like I'm having a problem. Put me right in there. Let me try that again. Let's see if I can add myself to the stream here. Anybody on Facebook able to see, or on YouTube? Today it's not working. Maybe. Oh, maybe I know why what happened. I am here, you just can't see me because let me see. There I am. All right. Sorry. We'll see how this goes. I was really actually, I'm just going to start all over. So let me get out of here and start all over. Let me add myself. There we are. Okay. So 3 minutes in, but I'm so happy to be here. Okay. So you guys can see me on Instagram, hopefully. I can't really read the comments because I'm getting settled and I'm super nervous, but I'm going to be fine. And so I'm so excited to say welcome to Behind the Scenes, the Women of the Word. So we're going to be having a number of guests that will come in. Myself, Tina, and Vero will be guest teaching every Friday night. And so for right now, I'm just excited that I get to open it up. We have, I'm trying to get past my nerves. So I know I do this all the time. I shouldn't be nervous, but I totally am. So bear with me. All right. Where am I? Okay, I see. Oh, I can see Jessica. She joined on there, and so she told me that you can see my face. Thank you, Jessica. All right, so we're gonna start. So today I'm really excited, guys, because we're gonna be talking about, okay, so behind the scenes. If you saw the description that I put up in the original bio, which, oh, my phone is being used. When we used the description in the bio, it was really talking about the behind the scenes of the Women of the Word. And the reason why I wanted to go through that and talk about behind the scenes of the Women of the Word was because it really is something that revolutionized my life. It changed me. When I became aware of really the true story about us as women, it really helped to change my perspective, my attitude towards God. And I didn't realize that I was so scarred by some of these ideas. I didn't realize that I had issues dealing with my identity until I really like allowed myself to experience God on a different level and to start to dig into the things that I was running away from. And so one of the things I'm really excited about, and I'm hoping that this Instagram stays on. Oh, it didn't, because it turned off and I don't understand why. Sorry guys, hold on. I guess Instagram is not going to have it today. Are you there? Okay. I don't know why that happened. I had it all set up, but I'm going to have to keep you guys right here on the front, and that way I can see you. All right. We are here. And now I can see you. I see a few of you are here. All right. So when I learned about the women of the word, it really helped to transform my understanding, because I think that I subconsciously in many ways felt like I could identify more with other people when they talked about the struggles that we as women had. And I think the hard thing for me is when I dealt with those struggles, I felt like I was seen and I was heard by the people of the world. Like I felt like I mattered, and the things that I was dealing with at home or in my heart mattered when I dealt with people in secular places. I guess that's the best way to say it. But as I think that when I had to come to a point where I realized the answers to the pain and the answers to the frustrations weren't with those secular spaces, and there were points of healing, but when I realized it wasn't rooted there, then I had to lean into God. And as I leaned into God, I began to really explore who He said I was. And I was like really disheartened at the beginning to find that there weren't many or not enough teachings and preachings that I encountered that allowed me to understand the identity of who I was as a woman. I felt like I was getting part of the story. And so what I'm really excited about today is to be able to dig a little bit deeper and really talk about the full story of what it means to be a woman of God, to talk about what it means to how the Lord sees us, and more importantly, like as a whole person, not just as a person who can give birth, not just as the source of a man's attraction, or like all these other things. It was really empowering for me to realize that I meant more than who I was connected to or who I birthed. And I think that for many single women, that is one of the biggest struggles that we fight and we wrestle with, because we can find ourselves feeling like we don't matter until we're connected to someone else. And then what's really scary is that oftentimes with women, this may happen to others, guys, I don't really know, so I can only speak from a female perspective. For many times as women, even once we are married and we have children, suddenly we feel like our identity is now caught up in the man that we're partnered to or the children that we birth. So what happens when a man leaves? What happens when a child leaves? Then we as women oftentimes are found with a struggle for identity at another place in our life. And so what I'm really excited about is to dig deeper in to these women. And I was really torn on where to begin. And I decided that I was going to start with the first story that really shook me. The first story in the Word that really grabbed a hold of me and said, wait a minute, have I been reading wrong my whole life? And it's not to say that all of the messages and all of the teachings that you've discovered and you've been empowered by are wrong. I just pray that as in the same way that I've like reading through and I'm discovering so much more about God and about myself as a woman and how I've been created through studying, I pray that it gives more. It adds more. It's not about either or. It's not about attacking or tearing down these other teachings that you've had that obviously are so empowering for you. So many things that have brought you at least until this point. So, I want to say that let's just dig into this. So God, I pray that you would speak to us today. I pray that you would calm my nerves, that you would give me clarity of thought, and that you would begin, Father, to download truth like never before. God, that even the things that I share that you've shown me would extend far beyond even the limitations of my own voice. I pray that it speaks to the heart of people, and that you would just break down your love for us. Let us understand more about how you've seen us and how you love us. In Jesus' name, amen. So when I look at this, I feel like one of the things I said is in the intro was talking about us as image bearers, which means that God created all of us in his image. And a lot of times, as women, we subconsciously put ourselves to the side. And I think it's not on purpose. It's just we tend to do this because we look, and he said, let us make man in our image. And then sometimes like the woman is made afterwards, out of Adam. But the reality is that it's really because of the majority of theologians, the majority of people who were even given the empowerment to study the word for so long, were very centrally male focused and had a very strong, a different perspective of the world. And I feel like when the Lord showed me, and I think that's why he wants to show me to start here, is that we were all built for such a time as this. And rather than say all of the things that we are learning in colleges and schools and all these other things are just so horrible, is it possible that God has put us in this position at this time for such a time as this, that we can then move forward and apply the things that we've learned? Not to say that this is going against the word at all, but as we explore and we learn more about history and more about culture, and we look at like the realities, we have the ability to have a greater understanding of God's goodness. The more we learn, it doesn't weaken my faith. The more I learn, it strengthens my faith. And so I'm excited to jump into the story of Esther. The story of Esther is really empowering for me because I think I was never really, I wanted to be more drawn to this, but when I thought about royalty and all of that, it felt very far removed for me. I didn't feel connected to an idea of royalty. I was raised in the hood a little bit, and I was raised doing ministry. And I think there was always this idea, this heart to have a lowly spirit, and not in like a way that was degrading, because I don't feel like I was raised in a degraded perspective, but just humble. And while I said, yes, I want to be yes, queen, yes, all that stuff, I also acknowledge that I think my life didn't really connect with the concept of a queen. So maybe that's why I wasn't fully drawn to this. But when I started to study it, I remember I had this limited view. And maybe this is also me, because I remember studying about the Holocaust when I was in middle school. And when I was in middle school, I remember reading journals of, I think it was, I want to say Anne Frank, and like in this journal, it was one of the sentences, I forget where it was so many years ago, said that I wanted to, like, she was describing her future and the life that she wanted. And she was saying she didn't want to be remembered just as one of these young girls that was chasing after boys. And in many ways, that was my prayer as a 12-year-old. I was like, God, I don't want to be like those other girls just chasing guys all the time. I mean, I feel like God really heard that prayer and really is preserving me now at 39. But nevertheless, I think the romanticizing of this story of Esther, this beautiful young girl who was chosen out of all the people. It was very fairy tale-ish, right? This beautiful young woman was chosen out of all of the young ladies in the land to be the queen. And because she was the queen, she was able to find courage to be used by God to save her people. What a beautiful story. And what I'm going to share with you doesn't negate that at all. It doesn't change the fact that God chose this woman and gave her strength and gave her the position to be able to use for his purposes. But what I think it does is I'm hoping to ground us a little bit in what the Bible actually says. I think that in our attempts to make the Bible more palatable, we can oftentimes remove some of the truth that we need, especially when it comes to these stories of women. So I thought that the best way we'll go about this today, and I put together a bit of a structure. I thought the best way to go about this is to kind of give my draw to why I chose this scripture. Read a couple of the passages that I think are most significant to like really get us into a greater understanding of the word. And then we'll dig into some of like the ins and outs of this. So if you guys have a Bible and you'd like to join me, and if you're watching it live, great, you can totally comment. I can see the Instagram lives. I think I can see these ones as well on Facebook and YouTube. And I'm sorry for all the delay for people who tried to get on earlier. But yeah, you can feel free to ask me questions. I'll answer as many of them as I can towards the end. But if you have your Bible, I'm going to be reading out of the NIV, and I like to use the study Bible. But it's the NIV study Bible. Every NIV is a little bit different, but that's where I'm going to start with. And so I'm going to read a bit of the story because if you've ever heard of Esther, sometimes we jump and we grab a couple of these, like the quotes that we'll hear is like, perhaps you were born for such a time as this. And then you also hear, if I perish, I perish. And we hear these stories of this great strength and bravery of a woman. And I'm glad to see some of my old beauty brunchers here. So I know maybe you have remember this story, but I'm going to try to take it really slow and not super slow, but slow enough to break it down. So I want to give a little, we're going to read through Esther 1 and chapter 2, and then we're going to touch a little bit on chapter 4, and then I'll summarize the rest. So if you want to join me, that's where we're going to go, because I was shocked that even as a kid, I've seen the movie A Night with a King, and it's just this beautiful love story that is not at all what happened in the Bible. Like, okay, there's parts of it that happen in the Bible, but despite the romance of it all that seems to have, and possibly from a male perspective, it can have a strong romantic quality. When you have realized some of these realities of what it means to be a woman, some of the romance is kind of hindered, I think. And I was talking to someone about this, and what the person said was like, we have to be careful because sometimes we'll remove ourselves and we'll apply modern ideologies, like current status quo, like the way that women in the world think now, to scripture. And then we have an inadequate reading of scripture. And while I am very sensitive to that, and I don't want to do that, like an example of that would be, is not having an awareness of like, the fact that the people were in exile, or not having awareness that people had kings and queens in the hierarchy of that whole system. But what I think that we can offer that I don't think is done enough is the humanity of us as women of God being created in his image, right? If I really am, as he says, created in his image, then I no longer have to apologize for the way that he created me. Do I need to work and strive to be more like Christ? Yes. But there is an idea of aligning my spirit and being filled with the fruit of the Spirit and those kinds of things, and bearing fruit of the Spirit, being filled with the Holy Spirit. Sorry, that's what I meant. But it's not about apologizing for the things that make me a woman. Like, we get that periods are gross. Nobody likes it. But it is such a beautiful component of our essence. It's the evidence that we are women. It is the evidence that we have the parts in our body to create children. That's low-key amazing. So we can be grossed out a million times about blood and about what it could mean. But the Bible is filled with evidence of blood covenant. For all the way from Abraham walking through the doves and then leaving that figure 8 when God said, do this, or to the priest pouring the blood onto the altar. blood is an essential part. And so to think that God built me with the ability to bleed every month and not die, there is a unique connection that we have with the Father and the concept of covenant that is unique and special. And that includes all of the things that, all of the hormone influx, all of the, what else? All of the emotion, all of the way he uniquely built us. My God, what a blessing it is to be a woman, to be the person that he chose to reveal himself to first, to be the person that would carry his son into this world. Wow, to be a woman, right? But I think that when we hear from a male perspective, when they feel very icky about periods and they're like the cloth and it's just like a dirty rag and all of these things, which is true, it's gross. It's not like we want to like parade the periods. I'm not to me, sorry, don't mean to talk about this too much, but the reality is like it is a beautiful essence of who we are, how God made us, and it too, all of this creation is connected to us as image bearers, reflecting an element of God's character, from his emotion to his passion, to how he loves, to how he is tender towards us, how he is courageous, how we as women can endure so many levels of pain. Man, God built us beautifully, and we are reflections of him and his love. So that being said, let's look, and even though I'm going to maybe make people feel a bit uncomfortable about this perspective of Esther, let's read it. Let's read it for ourselves. And I don't have a fancy like scripture thing, but maybe one day if anybody's out there who is willing to help man the studio, you let me know. And I would love to have some help here. All right. So let's just jump into Esther chapter 1. What I wanted to tell you a little bit is this is written it was written and it's placed after the book of Nehemiah, but from my understanding and studying, Esther, it kind of happens a little before Nehemiah. So this is, just to put into context of the story, this is in the Old Testament, so it is prior to Jesus actually being born and physically coming through Mary here on earth. So this is in the Old Testament. Esther is written, is a very short, maybe 10 chapters, Esther, sorry. Esther is written 10 chapters. It's short. It's basically, God is really not mentioned a whole lot. In here, we don't hear him speak to people, but his evidence of the Lord and his grace and his justice and his righteousness is all over the scripture. But God and the Lord and thus saith the Lord really isn't evidenced in like actual words. This is very interesting because it marks a very unique time in biblical history. I'm not a pro by any means. I'm just learning, so I'm open. If I like say something wrong and I learn something new, I will correct it. Okay. But this, from my understanding, is written, if you guys know the story of Nehemiah. So Nehemiah is the guy who goes, he's the cupbearer to the king, and he goes to the king and he says, King, I'm gonna need resources, and he rebuilds the wall of Jerusalem. But prior to rebuilding the wall, there is this season, and there before the Jews have been exiled from their promised land. So we know that Moses brought them into the promised land. They lived, they rebelled. They said, we wanted a king. Moses didn't, but Joshua did. Okay. But they wanted a king. So they asked for Saul. So God gave him King Saul. King Saul rebelled. Then they got King David, and David was an amazing king, but he also messed up, but he has a special covenant with the Lord. And then they have all these other kings that go and throughout all of this, his son Solomon, and then it goes on. But after Solomon, the kingdom is divided. And so it becomes a very hard place to be a Jew or to be an Israelite, I guess you can say, because the house of Israel is divided. And then some of them follow one king, and like they are the ones that eventually become the Samaritans. And many of them mix with a lot of the belief systems of other people, of other gods and all of that. Whereas the Jews, they held a little more true, but they still had seasons of rebellion. And so now at this point in the story of Esther and in this season, I'm not really sure all the contemporaries, but I know that Esther and Nehemiah are closely tied, and I believe a couple others of these prophets stories, they happen contemporaneously, same time. And so as we look at that, this happens where the Jews were exiled from their land, and so they were living in other lands. I wanted to imagine the best way to think about that is like, if you were kicked out, many of the refugees, right? They're stuck and they're having to go and live elsewhere because of the turmoil in their own land and all of the war. So that is kind of like where they're living, except if like all the refugees came here to the United States, let's say for instance, from Afghanistan, and let's say we don't treat them very well. Like you're here, but you are lucky you're here, so just keep it down, right? If we were to treat them like that, that's not how I would treat them, but that's how the idea. So in this season, the Jews were kind of living in this kind of oppressive state where they were living sometimes in secret and not so vocal, trying to keep it on the low because they didn't want to cause a ruckus because they were living in rebellion as well. They weren't really honoring God. And this is their season of living in exile. And so God is now at this time slowly bringing people back into Jerusalem. Then, as we know, Nehemiah builds the walls and then they start to rebuild Jerusalem and they come back home. But Esther is living in a time prior to that happening. And so they're living under oppressive rule by the king of Persia, King Xerxes. And so I'm going to go and read this chapter now. I'm sorry, it took me so long, but I really want to give you as much understanding as I possibly can provide. All right, so let's read chapter 1 together and let's see how your perspective is. Like, if you know anything about the story of Esther, was your story romantic? Because mine was. As I read it, not so romantic. All right, chapter 1. And please forgive my reading. I'm not that great at reading aloud. This is what happened in the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the city of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media. I'll go with that. The princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. So we're in Susa. Susa is the name of the city. And so he is throwing a big party. Let's keep going. Verse 4, if you're with me. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. Sounds like we're talking about God, but we're not. We're talking about King Xerxes, who reigned, and it was basically 180 days of partying. That's a half a year. So homie was celebrating and having an amazing party, celebrating, showing off all his wealth. All right. This is like customary, I suppose. And it was really like nobody was regulating it because this wasn't like a president doing that. It's not a democracy. This is a kingdom where the king rules. If he doesn't like it, you just can't deal with it. So that's what kind of place we were running here. Verse 5, when these days were over, the king gave a banquet. So he displayed it all. Then he had this big banquet lasting 7 days. So now this banquet is an elite banquet. It's a 7-day party in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to greatest who were in the citadel of Susa. So everybody was invited to this party. It was a turn up, the party of the parties. Now, in the United States, it's hard for us to imagine some of that because we are so like individualistic. We stay in our own homes. But I remember when I went to Europe. When I went to Europe, this turn up was like the whole community came out for New Year's. It was like everybody was out. Like in London, in Italy. I forget what city we were in Italy, but everybody was out. It's just everybody goes out and they all stay together. It's just a beautiful thing. But in this regard, this was like a celebration. They were all coming together. And we know that in the Middle East, a big part of this is having, a big part of their culture is hosting. And that was where they took great pride in taking care of visitors. Okay, anyway, but this is for the house, for the city. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen fastened with cords of white and linen and purple material on silver rings on marble pillars. Now you can say, wow, like this is, just say it's fancy, right? There were couches of gold and silver on mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other. And the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. So this is an important point. Everything was plush and turned up. I want you to imagine the most like luscious, like extravagant, flamboyant rapper. You know, this is the kind of guy, like he had everything and he wanted to let the alcohol flow. It was a party of all parties. This guy was liberal in his ideas, like not politically liberal, but just like he just wanted to give and give and give and like have lots of money and show off everything and everybody have fun. So you can start to get the kind of personality. And I'm not pulling this out. It's saying in keeping with the king's liberality, right? So it's showing about his character. So I like to read and understand who are these characters and how can I understand them better? So verse 8, by the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way, for the king instructed all wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. So this was like a party with open bar, the turn up, like open bar, have whatever what you want, this special kind, you get that special kind. Verse 9, Queen Vashti. So Queen Vashti, did you guys know there was a queen? Yeah, but you probably didn't know the full story of this queen. Let's get it. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for all the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. So what this tells me is that he throws this party, and there is like this party that is with men, and then there's a party that has the women. So she is allowed this option to have a party as well. So the women are celebrating and the men are celebrating in separate spaces. Okay, so that does specify that. Verse 10. On the seventh day, this is where the story gets like interesting, right? On the seventh day, Xerxes was high in spirits from wine. So I don't think that is different in Bible times. If you're high in spirits with wine, you drunk, right? Like you are drunk. I mean, the Bible says high in spirits. So he was happy. He was having a good time. He was drunk. Okay, let's keep going. He commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, Mehuman, Bithsa, Harbona, Bigtha, Abitha, Zethar, and Carcas, to bring before him Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. Okay, so first of all, I don't want to rush by the word eunuch. Eunuch these were men that were called to be servants of the king. And now to understand this culture, it's very interesting to me because they some of them might have been born, but most of them I'm not going to say anyway. Actually, I think it was Game of Thrones, which I do not recommend. It's like borderline pornography. But Game of Thrones has this scene like where they have like this whole army of men who are basically eunuchs. They're great warriors and all this stuff. But basically, they castrate these men in order to have their full loyalty, to keep them in submission. So they're like, we try to desexualize what's happening here, but it's very sexual, like in a very interesting way, because the way that they kept control of the people is through a lot of like these kinds of things, right? So these eunuchs were some of them were chose to be, and some of them were enslaved to be. So these men were chosen, but they were castrated so that they could be trusted with the women and trusted with the king's things, and understanding that their loyalty was completely to the king and could be trusted around the women to take care of the women as needed, so they wouldn't try to take advantage of the women. All right. So, but let's also jump into this. Queen Vashti wearing her royal crown, because we know this guy. He's drunk. He likes to have fun. He likes to like let everybody drink whatever they want. He's like a turn up king, right? Literally. And so he's like, hey, you know what else is really good? My wife. She's hot. Let's bring her out. Wear your crown. Tell her to bring her crown out here and let me show off how beautiful she is, right? Now you might say I'm like overdoing it, but I'm just reading it how it says it. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Um, so basically, the guys are drunk at a party, the girls are having their own party. He's like, you come over here and come and parade yourself beautifully with your crown and show off to all my guy friends how hot you are. Okay. Many of the times, like when I learned that, it just felt like he was asking her to come to the party and to present herself as if it was like a normal procedure out of her role as a queen. But what I didn't realize before was how drunk this guy was. Um, the Bible clearly says that he was high in spirits from wine. And so you can also start to get a bit of the character of this man as he's going through this. He wants to display it, like he thrives off of this energy of like all that he's getting from the people around him. And you can say, well, how do you get that, Rachel? Well, because of how he's displaying it. And then as we continue to read on throughout this book, you start to get the character of the king. He's not just like this really dignified king. He often is drinking, and he often is very emotional. For her not to come and him to be quickly so enraged, furious, burning with anger, doesn't show that he has any kind of like he's not necessarily known as, is not being described as a wise king. It's more of an emotional, erratic king, as I would see it. And I think why this is significant is because there are some scholars who look at why Vashti chose to not come. And now some people were saying, well, they could say because of how she might have felt that day. I really don't know. I could say emotionally, I'm like, man, like homegirl, maybe she didn't want to go. Maybe she was on her girl time, or maybe, I don't know why she didn't want to go, but she didn't want to go. Some some scholars, not theologians per se, they will say that there's a possibility that there was some political striving that could have existed. But because they're not like very clear on who King Xerxes was historically in terms of like, if this is the same King Xerxes that they're drawing these other comparisons to, they're not sure of all of the rivalry that was happening. And if possibly whoever Vashti was connected to before was now having conflict with some of the political moves. Not sure. Nevertheless, he was furious because she chose not to come to go display herself in front of the party. This is what really started to get to me. Let's keep going. I'm sorry. I'll go faster because I don't want to be here all day. Verse 13. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were the closest to the king. Karshena, Shethar, Amtha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, Memucan, and 7 nobles of Mercia and Media, who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. So he's frustrated. So King Xerxes then goes to his closest officials. Now, these are the closest officials who also have been supporting him through all of his endeavors, which include celebrations of his wealth and this week-long party. All right, verse 15. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asks. So this is not a matter of time. This is all happening in the same day from my understanding. It doesn't say that it was a delay. It doesn't say anything like that, but he is frustrated. And I can tell you why I believe that it was later. It was probably the same day. According to law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? So he's upset, he's angry, he gets his officials who are all there at this party as well, from my understanding. I could be wrong, but I believe they're all at this party. And so then he's like, what can I do? I can't believe she can't come. So she's not coming. So he's pretty upset. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. So he was upset. He's like, he's talking about himself in the third person. He's upset about it. Verse 16. Then Memucan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, and not only against the king, but against all the nobles and the people of all the provinces of King Xerxes. So now they're mad. And not only are they mad, but they're saying she's disrespecting you. And she's disrespecting all the nobles and all the people of Susa. How could you? And they are like, I don't know. From what I see, I don't need people around me that when I'm emotional to keep me on the emotional high and take it to the next level. But these wise men that he selected have exacerbated this to the point where, or exaggerated this, I'll say, to say, okay, not only is it bad for you, this is really bad. It's disrespectful to everybody, and blows it out of proportion, my opinion. But maybe this is how they run the kingdom. So I can honor that. That's how they run the kingdom. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end to the disrespect and discord. So their response to his anger is, yep, it's a mess. We got to do something about this, because this guy, this lady, once all of our wives hear about it, they're going to try to do the same thing. And how are we going to ever regain control of our community? Our homes are going to be a mess. Everything's going to be disrespectful. It's going to fall apart. How dare this happen? Okay. So we are now, this is how there will be no end of the disrespect and discord. And so to me, this is significance in verse 18 that I just read. This very day speaks that it's still of the same day, because the information is going out about what Queen Vashti did to her husband. And so they're immediately concerned. It's not a delay. This is all happening in the same day. Verse 19. Therefore, if it pleases the king, this is now some of his servants, or no, sorry, not servants, his wise men advising him. So he says, therefore, if it pleases the king, of course they have to say it humbly, let him issue a royal decree. So they're talking to him, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media what cannot be repealed. So make it, tell me, I always tell people, let me not make a decision while I'm mad. Now, I'm emotional, man. I don't even drink. So can you imagine being drunk and upset and frustrated and being like, you know what? We should make a law that sticks. Even I know I'm drunk, and I'm mad because I feel so disrespected. Let's make a law that we can't turn back. Now, for me, just looking at basic stuff, that concerns me about the leadership quality of what's happening here in Persia. Right now, Persia is one of the largest empires at this time, powerful, but it doesn't seem like good judgment. I'm not going to make a decision after someone has hurt my feelings or I'm crying. I'm just not going to do it. All right, let's keep rolling. So they said that they want to make a law that's not going to be repealed. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Okay, so that was a pretty rash decision, in my opinion. This is all happening the same night. From my understanding, from how it's laid out in scripture, everybody's drunk as they're making these decisions. All right, let's keep it moving. Then when the king's edict proclaimed throughout all this vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. Okay, so they believe that as they do this, he's saying, king, if you want to go do this, then respect will be for sure, because they'll see that the king is holding it down. So when the king holds it down, all the women will know, stay in check or else, right? This is basically what's happening. Forgive me if I'm misquoting it for you. Verse 21, let's get it. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice. So the king did as Memucan proposed. So all this while they're drunk. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each of the people in its own language, proclaiming in each people's tongue that every man should be ruler over his own household. All right. I've totally heard that before. Have you guys heard that scripture used before? I know it's mentioned again later, but it's so interesting. If anybody ever quotes it here, this is not per the advice of God. This is a bunch of drunk people saying that. So yes, we have other conversation about men being the head of the home, but if they quoted out of Esther, this is probably not a good place for it, because all these dudes who are making this decision have not talked to God, and they are all drunk, and they're not even God's chosen people. These are the Persians that were oppressing God's chosen people, just to be clear. All right. Now, we haven't even met Esther yet, but I want you to imagine what it must have been like for Vashti. her husband, who she probably got married into because of an arrangement from her father for some kind of land treaty agreement, because you can see that Persian king, he rules over an entire space that is vast, and they all speak different languages and they're all different. And so it's like, wow, like this is not just a small town of a little kingdom. Like this is bigger than Ali. I was going to say Aladdin, but yeah, it's bigger than that. All right. So let's meet Esther. This is where chapter 2 is where Esther comes into the scene. Later, when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. So later, when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, you guys know what that means? When he realized that he wasn't mad anymore, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. So he was feeling some kind of way. And I believe one of the other versions of the Bible actually says that he was feeling down. He's like, wait, what the heck did I do? Have you ever felt that way after you were drunk? What did I do? Verse 2. Then the king's personal attendants proposed. Oh, you're like, basically, you're feeling bad. Oh, don't worry. We have a plan. We got this great plan. We didn't ask God or anything because you're not even one of God's chosen people. But, you know, God allowed a lot of this stuff to happen, and God used these other people who served other gods for his purposes because of the rebellion of his own people, just so we understand some of this. So this is all a part of God's love story. Anyway, so this is the proposition that they give him. Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. All right. So let's not rush by this. He's saying, go ahead and make a search. I got you. I know this other woman that you have. She was gorgeous. She was beautiful. And you wanted to show her off wearing all the stuff that she has. It's a beautiful idea. Said, but I know you're feeling down, so let me fix it. How about we give you all these virgins? We'll gather up all the best ones. Virgins, like it means they've never had sex. So most of the time, these virgins are not well into their 30s. These more than likely, and from what I understand, even Esther, as she was a part of this, they're teenagers, young girls who have never had sex. We don't know the age of this king, right? So, but we know he's already on at least his second marriage because he just got rid of the first one. So he is inviting all the beautiful young virgins. I love it because when someone was telling me, oh, well, don't decontextualize it. You just got to keep it in context. I'm like, yes, but a virgin is a virgin. And that means she has not been touched by a man and has not had sex. And she is beautiful and she is young. All right. So the king invites her, or he doesn't invite her. He gets, but let's look at the language of verse 3. Let the king appoint commissioners. So send people on like leaders to every province in his realm. Bring all the girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Gather them. Go get them. Bring them. Okay. Do you think the girls had a choice? I would like to really think about that because that's what I ponder. Was it like a contest where the girls were wondering if they wanted to be queen and be a part of his harem? Because in many stories, it feels so romanticized, right? Like, oh, how beautiful. Wow. I would love to be a queen and live in his harem. It's a chance. It's kind of like a Disney story, right? That's how it comes off. But do you know what a harem is? Google it. Google a harem. You don't have to. I'm going to tell you. It's basically enslaved women who are there for the purposes of pleasing the king. Concubines live in a harem. Concubines live in a harem. So get all these young virgins to come, the most beautiful girls, bring them from their home, have them live at the harem and in your city of Susa, which means have a group of women living here on your property, and let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, because we only can trust the guys who have been castrated, right? who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. So get all the most beautiful women, teenagers likely, who are virgins, to come and live here at your palace and go and put them through all the beauty treatments. And you won't even be thinking about Vashti, right? So you won't even think about that other woman. It's pretty scary to me because a lot of people try to romanticize a concubine. But if you Google also, research what a concubine was, what a harem is, it is used for the pleasure of the king. It's not to read him books like what is it called? Night with the King showed Esther reading a book to him. Oh, I know you cannot ring, my lord. Let me read this beautiful story of my ancestry. That's not what they were there for. They don't need to be beautiful for that. One night with the king wasn't read with the king. I don't want to discourage you, but I like to hear the real story. You guys with me? Hopefully you are. All right, let's go. So we're in verse 4. So this is now where she's brought into. Then let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This appealed to the king, and he followed it. He was like, great idea. I won't be sad anymore because that homegirl did me wrong and I feel sad. Sounds good. Give me all the virgins and I can try them all out. And whichever one I like the most, I get to keep. Sounds good. Tell me a worldly guy who wouldn't want that. That's like R. Kelly at its finest, right? Sorry, is that too far? Probably too far. But this is what I'm seeing, right? Like this is how it looks. I don't know how else to read it. And so this is after he's no longer drunk, but you can tell the kind of character of this king. Verse 5. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. So basically, we have Mordecai, who was obviously these were all Jews, and they were a part of this like exile, and they were taken captive when the kings lost, when the king of Judah lost his place and his footing and was taken over by the king of Persia, or these other kings, right? So verse 7, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because sorry, I have to turn that on. Where was I? I lost it. Brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl who was known as Esther, so Hadassah is Esther, the same person, who was lovely in form and features. And Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So now we have this beautiful romantic story, right? This king, he was drunk, got rid of his wife. It was like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to get me some new ones. And now we have this beautiful young woman who is an orphan and is being taken care of by her uncle, right? And they're in exile, escaping all of they're basically in hiding because he was not hiding, but in oppressive state, being like almost like refugees in a land, or prisoners in a land that didn't really welcome them. So they weren't proud Jews and proud. They were just trying to get through it. They were living in exile, which means they were kicked out of their homeland. It was a horrible place. It was hard to live. Right? And she lost both her mother and father. And so this older man said, I'm going to take care of you, my little cousin, right? Verse 8, when the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many girls were brought to the citadel of Susa and placed under the care of Haggai. So again, they make it seem like every other story, like these women went voluntarily. But I like to read the language of the Bible, and it says, when the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, they were brought to the citadel. It wasn't when the invitation went out to the ball and all of them were allowed to come in white horses and carriages. No, it was an order and they were brought. So they were chosen. You're hot, you're hot, you're hot, you're a virgin. Oh, you're good candidate in the truck. Except they didn't have a truck, but that's what happened. Tell me if I'm wrong. Please speak up in the comments if you see it differently. I'm here. Hey, sorry. Under Hagar, I'm still in the middle of verse 8. Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. So it hasn't changed. She's still in a harem. And she's entrusted to this wonderful eunuch who has also been oppressed and has been castrated, who's taking care of her. The girl pleased him and won his favor. So obviously they had a good relationship. Immediately, he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. Bam! It sounds good. But I want you to imagine this sounds good. I don't know if I would feel so happy. I've been ripped from my land because I'm pretty. And now I'm like, you're gonna get a go spa treatments and fancy food. Maybe she was hungry. Maybe she didn't have it. So I think a lot of the romanticizing of the story seems great, and maybe because people are, I don't know if you've ever experienced someone who's been in an abusive relationship or abusive home, and then you get them and you invite them and they'll basically take anything because they're no longer, in a tough place. But this girl didn't really have a choice. So to romanticize the beauty treatments and the special food is really hard for me because if you ask any mom or any kid, even, no, let me not say it that way. It's just hard for me. I'd rather be with people I love than to be imprisoned with fancy things. She didn't have a choice, is what I'm trying to say here. Okay, let's keep going. He assigned to her 7 maids selected from the king's palace and moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. So she did get favor. And that was likely due to her beauty and her wonderful character, which we later find out more about because she is she's an honorable young woman. This is not to say she's a bad person because she's had these horrible things happen to her, having lost her parents and having to live in exile with her family and her people or her uncle, like living as a Jew in oppression. Like, I'm not saying she's a bad person. It's just tough. So obviously she has good character and she's being treated well because of her good character and her beauty. Verse 10. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Now, her uncle or her cousin said, just keep it on the low that you're Jew. Like, don't make a big deal about it. Which also tells me that you can see that the people here were, maybe it wasn't super obvious. That's why she had the best I can say it is, a lot of my Asian friends would come in with their Chinese name or their Korean name. And when they got here, they had a different name. So Hadassah, Esther, likely how they changed the name in order to fit in a little more without having so much of a ruckus. You know what I mean? All right. So they said, keep it on the low for your safety. You'll probably get more treated better. People don't really like us that much. So you can kind of get the vibe of the culture of the time. All right. At verse 11. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. What does that tell you? He is going back and forth every day to check on his niece, his little cousin. I almost moved to tears to imagine the pain of a man who took in his little cousin, his niece, whatever you want to call it. I think it's her cousin. To just check and make sure she was okay and how they were treating her in the harem. As romanticized and royal it is, it's dangerous to be in the harem. It's dangerous to be around a king, especially a king. He's not like the prince that you would imagine in Cinderella, guys. He's not the prince who kissed Sleeping Beauty. No, this is a drunkard who basically divorced his wife in a fit of rage. This is what I want us to think about. So Mordecai in all of that was like, I need to check on her. I need to check on her. I hope she's okay. Every day going back and forth. All right. Oh, I'm going over on time. I'm sorry. Okay, let me go. Maybe I should do part 2 next time. I'll do part 2 of Esther next week. But let's get through just this part. Maybe. We'll see. All right. Before the girl's turn came to go to King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed to the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So every time she would go, she could pick anything she wanted and go to see the king. Now, this is how it would go. Are you guys still there? Oh, no. Sorry. This is how it would go. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem, to the care of Shazgaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. So one night with the king, she would pick whatever she wanted to go see the king, spend a night with the king, and then be given to a different eunuch to take care of her after her night with the king. And then he would take care of her and all the other concubines, which are all the sex slaves. Yeah. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. I feel very emotional about this because when I think about that, it feels hard to imagine, because as much as we say, oh, that's just how the times were, that's just how people are. The reality is, like, this is a time when, like, the who we are as women, the sexuality and how sex affects us, and that intimacy can affect us, or being violated, being snatched up from your home, being oppressed, all of these things are still very relevant to who we are as humans. So I'm just going to finish chapter 2 and then I'll close off. Okay, so give me just a couple more minutes. I started a little late today with the delay. Okay, so she couldn't go back to him unless he was pleased. Verse 15, when the turn came for Esther, the girl Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai the eunuch, who was in charge of them, suggested. Charge of the harem suggested, and Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. Now, what I've seen in the movie was showing that she was so humble, and she only took only took a small necklace because I thought it was what I came in with, and they robbed me of it. And all the other girls were wanting the big jewelry and all the there's no evidence of that story. Like, I don't see that here. But the only thing that she brought is she had the inside scoop, because he liked her and he was one of the eunuchs that served there. He was able to say, hey, homie, he likes this. Make sure so that you can keep on getting called back and so you can get pushed to the front. This is what he likes. We don't know what she took or what, but we're going to romanticize it and say she was just so humble and she brought just this. I don't know. It doesn't say that. All she brought was what she was obedient. She was obedient. She was obedient to her tío or her cousin, and she was obedient to, and she brought favor. So she obviously has character. So I'm not dissing Esther, just to be clear. All right, let's keep going. We're almost done. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. Verse 16. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, of the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Verse 17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women. It doesn't say that he really liked her reading skills. He was attracted to her. It says that in the Bible, to be clear. All right. And she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So out of all the virgins, he liked her the best, and he was the most attracted to her. That's the language of the Bible. So, and it's funny that out of all the places in the Bible, this is where her virginity is brought up again after it hadn't been brought up for a long time. So after the night with the king. Anyway, all right. So then he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So at that point, she became queen. You do the math. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all the nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. When the virgins assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, but Esther had kept her secret and sorry, I see this keep on blacking out. Esther kept her secret and her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions, and she had done when he was bringing her up. So she is obviously a very obedient young lady. During the time of Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigtha and... Okay, I'm going to stop here. Okay. I just wanted to introduce us to the real story of Esther. Feel free to jump in if you guys have any thoughts, because to me, the evidence here, and I think I want to continue how this, to bring it full circle and bring it all the way together. I think this is enough for us to like settle on and getting this part of the story of Esther. People can say, oh, well, you are putting your 2021 spin on it, Rachel, because you're just like this feminist, like liberal woman, and you're just this or whatever. But what I would say is that is because people haven't taken the time to look and try to consider the perspective of this woman. For me, when I look at this, I think there is evidence throughout the Bible that these elements of sexuality and emotion and oppression aren't different. Because when I look at the heart of who we are as women, emotionally, sexually, physically, mentally, maybe even like all these other things that make us women, those things haven't changed since biblical times, because this is how we were created. It's not something that we suddenly have morals and standards and suddenly rape isn't rape. There's evidence that rape was horrifying for women, not just because of culture and because it was shamed upon, but because what it did to a woman. And any woman who has ever encountered any kind of sexual abuse knows that it's not just about how people will see you, it's what it does to you emotionally. So the sexuality and the violation of women, to me, it doesn't feel different. So understanding the character and the struggle that Esther might have faced is real. And I would say that additionally, there's more evidence of, and I wrote down some notes because there's more evidence that this is not a weird way to read the story, because when we think about even the Psalms of David's emotion, and that's why we're so connected to the poetry, because it taps into universal truths that exist beyond time. So when we understand that we can make the humans of this Bible relevant to today, because we all encounter emotion, pain, passion. Read the Songs of Songs or the Songs of Solomon. The passion for one another, the feeling of betrayal, all of the passion, the love, all of that that's tied up with sexuality is not watered down back then, or suddenly something that we feel that they didn't feel. Violating of a woman, oppression, to be a person who is oppressed in a land that is not your own, and to hide your identity because you have to change your name, that does something to you. So I think that there is still even to just even look, I want to give another example. The way that David's sons responded to the rape of his daughter, or even which we'll talk about another time, Tamar, or even the way Israel, his sons, responded to the rape of their sister. Like that response and the shame and overwhelming pain that happened tells me that the sexual abuse and like the way that Esther felt is not different than if it were to happen today. The psychological, emotional, and oppression and trauma is not different. There's evidence throughout the word that women are still women. Pain is still pain. Rape is still rape. Death is still death. And so this is the first phase of this story. And I think it speaks to us being human and the characters of this Bible story and the women of the Bible being human. We oftentimes gloss over this romanticized story of Esther. It wasn't romantic to me. It doesn't feel romantic to me. The one night with the king that she was hoping for in the book or in the movie could have very well been the most traumatic day of her life. She likely lost her virginity that night to a stranger, an older man who she didn't know, and she didn't have a choice. You can say, oh, well, it's the culture. It's the culture. Does that change that her Theo or her cousin was waiting for her every day, wondering if she was okay? I hate to leave on this note, but I think it's something for us to settle in, because it doesn't take away from the power of what she does later. It only adds to it. The fact that this woman who has gone through all this is the same gangster who rises up and says, yes, I'm going to go to the king and I'm going to tell him the truth and we're going to take back so that my people don't die. To me, that makes it even more dope. I don't need a romantic love story. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, everybody in the world who felt like women had to be taught in the Bible in a romantic context in order to see their strength. Oh, heck no. To me, to see the woman who has overcome so many obstacles find the strength and the wherewithal to go back to God and to say, I will stand and do what's right, despite whatever I've been through, empowers me to say, I can do it too. You can do it too. Ladies, gentlemen, whoever you are, no matter what oppression you've dealt with, that's not where your story ends. And God can give us strength. And how much more? I would like to next week bring us back to the point where I'll finish Esther's story a little bit. I'm not going to do a whole lot of reading because I think it's just to show her strength. And so we'll build off of this. And then we'll go into how this connects to Jesus, because I like to bring every story back to Jesus and how she fits in to this love story that Jesus always intended from the beginning, from Genesis to Revelation to the present day, and how we fit into that, because it's not over. And so we are a part of the love story. We are valid. Our voices, our experiences are valid. And so I guess I'll just end there because I'll just keep talking and I know I can't dig into the rest. So God bless you guys. Does anybody have any suggestions, questions, thoughts? I'll just give you like a couple of seconds. We're on live on all the platforms. All right, any thoughts? Okay. I hope you enjoyed it. So Esther part 2 next week. And then we'll probably spend, you'll have guests, other people. Oh, let's see. I'll let you jump in for a second, Mom. I'll end the YouTube one. So bye, everybody on YouTube. We'll see you later. Thank you. Next week, Esther part 2.